My name is Sarah Hicks, and this is the X-Treme Makeover presentation for Nu713 Organizational and Systems Leadership for the Advanced Practice Nurse. This is spring of 2021. So I've just developed some learning outcomes for this presentation to identify miscommunication that occurred in my work environment in the COVID ICU, discuss variables that influence that miscommunication, that's relating to the organization of conversation, patterns of relating, ways of talking, listening, and being, and innovation from our chapter, and to plan a goal for my organization to go from mechanistic and ritualistic to an organization of conversation and rewrite the event using positive variables. So the story that I'm going to use of miscommunication in my workplace is from my travel assignment that I'm on right now. We were at shift change. I was coming on for the day. This occurred with a night shift charge nurse and a day shift new graduate nurse who the night shift charge nurse did not prone the COVID ventilated patient because she didn't know how, and the new graduate nurse was asking her why she didn't prone the patient or what next steps she needed to do to prone the patient, since the doctor had ordered that. The charge nurse was very condescending to the new graduate nurse and just said, "We didn't prone him. We don't have a policy here to prone him." This was towards the beginning of the pandemic, and the charge nurse was a weekend night shift charge nurse, and she had not learned of any proning policies that had happened. So it would be the nursing staff, the charge nurse, and the new graduate staff nurse, but really all of the nurses that were around the nurse station for a shift report, because everyone heard the conversation and saw the conversation happen. What is failure to identify and use the hospital proning policy? When it's morning shift change? Where it's the COVID ICU nurses station, and the result is the patient was not proned properly, and patient safety and quality of care was not prioritized. The new graduate nurse, she was just very defeated. She just was lost. She didn't know what to do. She wasn't questioning the charge nurse. She just didn't know what she needed to do for the patient, because obviously the doctor was going to come in that morning and ask why he was not proned. And the other nurses around the nurses station, I felt like I needed to include this. They were misinformed because they heard the charge nurse say that there wasn't a policy. Therefore, they believed that there wasn't a policy to deal with proning for their experience in the future on the unit. So, conversation themes that contributed to this miscommunication. This is a pandemic. It was we were well into it, a few months, and this particular ICU is staffed with about 80% of travel nurses, and so the environment is very stressful. This is a smaller hospital that doesn't have as many resources, and so there are quite a few patient deaths, usually one or two a day, definitely one a shift. And so staff, they're really stressed out, especially for the staff nurses. This particular charge nurse, she has been with the organization for many years, and she was outnumbered by travel nurses, as well as having a staff shortage due to the turnover with COVID and the demand for travel nurses. There's just a different presence of staff every day. I know contributed to both the new graduate and the charge nurse. This created a culture where the nurses felt underappreciated, like no one listened to them, hopeless from just one, the situation of the pandemic, the amount of death going around, and then under-equipped, which does lead to a lack of innovation. This particular charge nurse, she is a wonderful nurse, but she stated several times that there was no policy for proning. She felt like because they were already under-equipped with the pandemic, they didn't have the resources they needed. She kind of asked the question, why would we even have a proning policy? This conversation really came from a pattern of meaning. Priority was placed on the hospital, and the hospital wants us to do this, and we need to do this, rather than the nurses, the needs of education for proning. Innovation was really enacted from the top downward. So, that would be administration saying, yes, we are using proning. The manager saying, yes, we are using proning, but then once it gets to the charge nurse, that stops because they were not proning. So the listening pattern that the charge nurse used came from a perspective of, I already know. The textbook talks about this form of listening being, you're just listening just to confirm what you're already saying, because you think you're already right. You've been a nurse for several years. This is a new graduate. You're already right. There's no policy. In this form of listening, the charge nurse, she really just denies what doesn't fit with what she believes. And her belief was that there was no policy on proning. Innovation, this is really like with COVID, there are many things that changed and were just messy with what we've learned with COVID, especially in the ICU. Really, there aren't many things that stayed the same, and there was really no room for linear thinking with this pandemic. But I know that the charge nurse, she just had anxiety and fear. One, because we had already talked about she was outnumbered. There were a bunch of travel nurses around her. She wanted to be in control because she was the charge nurse, and she was using that habitual, mechanistic, and linear thinking with dealing with the conversation. I don't think she was meaning to demean the new graduate nurse in any way. So the first thing I would do to change the story is just to really address both nurses. The charge nurse, because obviously she just needed to be educated, and she was very stressed. Putting your name and your license on 12 COVID ICU patients for any amount of time, even if it's just an hour as a charge nurse, is incredibly challenging. And then the new graduate nurse, of course, she needs to feel empowered. She needs to feel like she can ask questions, she can look for policy, and not be, shut down. And all of the other nurses around, whether they're travel nurses or staff nurses, this is just an example of, what we need to do from now on as far as education and proning for the patient's sake. So for organization as conversation, I really liked how the book talked about nurses can practice rehumanization in order to move that conversation as organization forward. You can have the courage to be honest as far as the charge nurse and say, I don't know how to prone a COVID patient, and I don't even know where to find this policy. When that new graduate was asking her, she could have just said, hey, I don't know where to find this. Let's go ask someone together so that we can resolve this, instead of just shutting it down. For patterns of relating, really, it's really shown that horizontal decision making is better to put priority on the team members to help achieve the hospital's mission and core values. Goes back to those themes and the culture as far as, we're in this together. We're all making decisions together to, okay, we're going to find out how to prone, whether it's a charge nurse or a new grad nurse or the manager or the house supervisor. We're going to do this together so that we can enact the hospital's mission and core values to prone the COVID patients. As far as listening, the charge nurse could have said, she could have used the wow, look at that form, and just really taken into fact that this is new data, this is put out by the CDC. If she went up the chain and she couldn't find any answers, she could have Googled, and went to the CDC's website they have videos of how to prone patients. That's how we actually learned in Birmingham back in February, when this was very new, how to prone patients. And then innovation. The book highlights how healthcare innovators are encouraged to say yes to the mess instead of using linear thinking. Also, that trust and curiosity are essential for innovation to move forward. That trust is really, it's hard as a staff nurse and dealing with travel nurses and also new grads who you feel like you need to take under your wing. How do you take someone under your wing when you don't know everything? Well, instead of trying to just use a linear strategy, get control of the situation, say I'm the charge nurse, you can just embrace the mess, the situation, and say, okay, we're going to trust each other. We're going to be curious. We're going to look up how we need to prone this patient and find a policy for it. So I've rewritten the situation, who, of course, is still the nursing staff, the charge nurse, and the new graduate staff nurse. What is the charge nurse uses organization as conversation and asks the manager that morning where to find the pruning policy for instruction and how to prone a COVID patient. So not only does she locate the policy, which is on the Baptist homepage, she also asks the manager to show her how to prone the patient so that she knows the next time how to do it on her shift. Then she goes further and the charge nurse teaches the new graduate nurse how to find and use the policy. When would still be that morning shift change where the COVID ICU nurse is stationed, and then pay attention to these results. They're significantly changed. The patient was proned properly, leading to an increase in patient safety and quality of care. Also, the new graduate nurse felt empowered and supported by leadership, and other nurses who observed were encouraged. I just think this is so important because we have a large percentage of new graduate nurses coming out, that they're going to be asking questions. They're going to be asking those questions they don't know how to do. And unfortunately, with COVID, it's so new that there aren't many policies, and there are going to be times where there are charge nurses or even staff nurses that they don't know the answer. And it's just so important to use the organization of conversation to really communicate and say, okay, I honestly don't know the answer to that, or I heard that one time, or I did that back in December, or I did this at another travel assignment. Let me ask someone, let me find this policy, and we can learn together how to get through this. This has been a long year and a long pandemic, and I'm glad that I've learned this. I never thought that I would be able to identify with something just out of a leadership book like this, but it really has hit home for me.